Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's CCMA session on education and SRLs. So this session will be recorded and will be later available on the CCMA YouTube channel. We'd like to acknowledge today our series sponsor, BD Biosciences. And today our Meet the Cores of Canada will be Derek Router from Dalhousie University. And with that, I will pass it over to Kathy.
Okay, thank you so much, and welcome everyone to the meeting today. So I'm happy to introduce our guest panelists that we have today. And the first panelist that we'd like to introduce is Tim Bushnell. So go ahead, Tim.
Hello, thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I am Tim Bushnell. I work at the University of Rochester in upstate New York, not to be confused with New York City. We're about 7 hours away by car. So if you ever want to come visit, we're actually closer to Toronto, so just drive right down. I've been doing flow cytometry for a long time. I've been running course since 2003. And when I started running course, the first thing I learned was education is critical to making sure that the users have a good experience and get good data out. And so for that reason, I've been doing this education for many years and I'm very passionate about it, as are everybody else on this panel. So we're looking forward to your questions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tim. And Derek, would you mind introducing yourself?
Not at all. So I'm Derek Roeder.
The other Derek, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
Oh, yeah.
Derek Davies, yes. Thank you. That's my fault, sorry.
It's just too confusing, right? Anyway, good afternoon or good morning, whatever time it is where you are. My name is Derek Davies and I work at the Francis Crick Institute in London, UK, which is a bit further away from Canada. And my role is in training. I'm the national training lead in science technology platforms. And if you're aware of the Francis Crick Institute, it's the UK's largest biomedical research institute. And one of the founding principles is that we're very supportive of science outside the building, both in UK and beyond that. So my role is to sort of twofold, really, is to coordinate internal training of users and staff in all of our core facilities, and also develop external training in core facility, everything, whatever we do, management and techniques and technologies and so on. And like Tim, I've been involved in education for a long time. For nearly 30 years, I ran the core flow cytometry facility. But now I've had 2 years in education and it's been fun. So this will be an interesting discussion today.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Derek. And then from there, Pina Colalusa, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Pina from the University of Calgary. I'm the director of the live cell imaging laboratory in the Snyder Institute. Since 2002, I've been heading a platform that supports a research community in a faculty of medicine, the Cummings School of Medicine. And integral to our support, we identified that education and training had to be embedded with the infrastructure. And we've developed an education training program locally for credit and offer credit. And we're also involved with some national efforts as well as through the Canadian Light Microscopy course. Thank you.
Thank you, Pina. And then Jennifer Wilshire, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning. So I'm happy to be here with everyone. Thank you to Asia and Dan and Kathy for inviting me. It's going to be an exciting morning. Want to listen to all your questions and answer them. I work in R&D at StemCell Technologies at what's currently known as Vancouver, BC. And it's my privilege to work and do flow cytometry on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. So we do quite a lot of training. We have a large number of interns, we call them co-ops, that come through StemCell. And we do a large amount of training. We have sort of the 4 main training courses that you would have in most courses: principles of flow cytometry, hands-on machine instruments, as well as analysis, software analysis, and then multicolor are our main 4 that we do. And I've been doing training for a long time. Actually, I've worked with many other people here and had the privilege to do that. And I would say my philosophy is all about active learning. And I've been trying to sum that up recently in some other instances. And it really, to me, is about whether you're leaning forward or leaning back as a learner, right? So if you're leaning forward, you know, and engaged, and your brain hurts a little bit, that learning is really happening. And there's lots of evidence around this, that you know, this is an evidence-based subject, that we can really learn a lot about how people learn, because we ultimately want them to know the information, but apply it, right? And have some sort of return on investment. So rarely do we actually ever measure that piece of it, but we do know from all the studies out there, if you're leaning forward, if you're actively engaged, it's very different process for your brain than if you're leaning back, even just a few inches. It really does make a difference, that passive sort of sitting back and letting it wash over you, which is very enjoyable in a lot of ways, because especially when you have a really good teacher, you're just enjoying it washing over you. But unfortunately, that's what happens. It sort of washes over you, and then long term, is that going to lead to you doing something different to get better data, and so we can do better science? Unfortunately, not as much as if you were leaning forward and kind of in it a little bit more. So that's sort of one of the things I've been thinking about lately.
Awesome. Thank you all. This is going to be a great discussion. So before we jump into that, we're going to have Derek Rauter give his little Cores of Canada spiel in our effort to better integrate and collaborate between facilities in Canada. So Derek Rauter, we'll pass it on to you.
All right, thanks. Appreciate very much the invitation, and I'm very glad we're continuing these online meetings. You know, I would dearly love to get back to having our CCMA meetings. I found those incredibly useful. So at least we can continue the networking. And you know, I've reached out to several people that are here today for my own learning and discussion of things. So anyway, we're at Dalhousie University, and our core flow cytometry facility is underneath the Faculty of Medicine at Dalhousie. We do offer services to sciences outside, and a few applications for industry, but probably 90% of what we do is Faculty of Medicine, and probably 75% of that is immunology, and then a breakdown through all the other medical sciences, pathology, pharmacology, chemistry, what have you. We're currently operating 4 analyzers, so an 8 and a 12 color Canto and Celesta, and an 18 parameter Fortessa and a 28 parameter Symphony, which is relatively new to us. We have 2 sorters, although actually interestingly in the past few years, the sorting applications, we could probably really get by with 1 for the amount of time that it's used, but we did upgrade a little bit so that we got 4 lasers instead of the 2 that we struggled by with for ages. And we do have also an image stream, which also was brand new to us late last winter, or I guess it would be around February-ish that we got it. And I'll be reaching out probably to you, Asia, for more help with that. As
sounds good to me.
There just wasn't quite as much impetus with the COVID interruption. All the people that really wanted to get on and try things haven't yet. So we're playing with that, and it does some interesting things. So our course sort of basically grew out of a single instrument, which was a Caliber back in the late 90s. I'd been a user myself of the FACS scan before the Caliber arrived. And that was for quite some time a departmental instrument. And then probably in the early 2000s or so, it became a cores instrument. Shortly after that, we acquired our first sorter in Area 1, which is now retired as well. And then a few years later in Area 3, and then a few years later, 2014, a Fortessa. So there was really a big shift at the time the Fortessa arrived, because we had people doing a lot of very simple, small panels, 2 to 4 colors on the Caliber, and then all of the acquisition that was non-sorting was going through the Area sorter, and then that really all turned around when we got the Fortessa, and we're still sort of we're still sort of learning this since we just got the 28 color symphony was installed very late last fall. So we've got probably, about 8 or so individual users, 4 or 6 labs on it now. And I'm very keen to listen in and see how the discussion goes today, because education from our core has always been an issue for us, and we've certainly not come up with the right solution.
I think that's a
So there's
common-
education on the high end for things, platforms like the Symphony and high dimensional analysis, but it almost to me is more of a struggle because you have more trained users, independently trained users using things like a Celesta and a Canto. So we've changed our approach over the years from just a simple sort of 4-hour training session to providing them pre-training materials and doing quizzes to see that they've sort of read through that, and then going from 1 session to at least 2 sessions, and then most likely a 3rd session, and sort of restricted access, which gets better as they're proven to know what they're doing. And I would try and supplement it with some sort of Q&A sessions. And we've been toying with and preparing some instructional videos, and thinking, how much do we really want to go online, and how much do we want the online methods to assess what they've learned. So we're still very much trying to develop that. So I'm very keen to hear what everyone has to say today.
Perfect, Derek. Thank you so much. And that's actually a great lead in to start off our discussion today about education in SRLs. So one of the first things that we want to start talking about is use of pre-existing resources from outside of your facility. So we've just launched a poll, and we're going to ask everyone in the audience if they could start answering that question. And we're going to start the discussion there. So as everyone's filling out this poll, all of our attendees, I would like to get some information from all of our guest panelists and say, do you use educational resources from outside of your facility to train your investigators?
Yeah, I can start with that. Yes, I would say. I think you don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel. You don't want to start from A to Z if there are good things out there. So we will always point people in the direction of, a lot of the manufacturers' websites are very good. There are a lot of good educational resources run by the larger cores. It's always worth having a list of those, I think, and pointing people in the right direction, especially if it's things that are relatively passive that they can do in their spare time. But you would supplement that with whatever you can provide in your own lab. And I'm sure this will come up again, but obviously that is going to differ depending on the size of your lab, the remit, and the type of people that you have both working for you and using the lab as well.
Yeah, I would agree with Derek. The resources that are out there, as long as you vet them, are pretty good. And then you supplement with specifics. Here at Rochester, we have specifics for our facility. So those we have to train. But if you want to talk about compensation, we talk about compensation. We'll point you to videos and websites that talk about this, because it's good to have multiple sources, because everybody learns slightly differently, and everybody, even Jennifer, Derek, and I will put different emphasis on how we talk about compensation, the common technique. And by sharing those with other people and saying, here are 10 different ways people talk about compensation, they get to find the one that clicks with them. And that's why it's great to have all these great resources out there. And as Derek said, have that list.
And then I think I really like also all of the data examples, bad data examples, and the rules that we're trying to sort of always be talking about. Compensation's one, but there's lots of other, mistakes people make, and then we're trying to get them to avoid it. But if they can see the real data, but actually gathering good data to show people the mistakes, that isn't just a total gong show that you can't really parse out what the one specific mistake was, is tricky. So I've gathered a lot of data, and I think from all the people here, I've used your data and with permission. And so I think that's really important that we all share those examples so that we start to talk a common language too around those mistakes.
If
And,
I could add something.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's it like in microscopy for you?
In microscopy, Jennifer, I want to pick up on what you mentioned about active learning and the learner. I think the learner is really important here. As a specialist in optical imaging, it's easy for me to give you 100 references. So when we we have the program where there's the pre-training and we have an online learning management system. In our case, we use D2L. And we're careful to say what's needed and what's nice, because what we thought was easy was really overwhelming the learners when we surveyed them. So we try to keep it skeletal. But as Tim and Derek mentioned, having the multiple viewpoints and these excellent resources, why reinvent the wheel when so many people are doing a great job already? And often the learners themselves will come back and offer us, they've gone and delved and found a really great video or aspect that way. So I think it's the material, but it's also creating that sense of, I'm not just one person being trained, I'm joining this wonderful world of microscopy. The community is worldwide. It's local, we try to encourage that. But now that I see these, they shouldn't be new to me, but I see new names here too. Like, I'm really interested in hearing about what the Crick is doing, and perhaps we'll be pointing more people that way. So the idea is that you're a learner and it's lifelong. The mindset is you're not going to learn everything right away, but that whole world is just, we want you to learn, we want you to succeed. So I think this is a really wonderful community for that.
I really like what you're saying there about it being overwhelming. Oftentimes we dump like 10 websites with probably 50 hours of material on it, and people never do it. They want to, it's in their back pocket, but they never get there. So what I've been trying to do recently, sort of lessons learned when classes I've taken, where I'm like, I'm totally going to go home after this class and do all this, and I never do, right? And so I'm trying to give people the 2 to 5 minute version. And so I'll cut out, I won't cut their video down, but I'll say watch between minute 36 and 38 or whatever, because that's where like the key learning is. So try to do it micro learning, especially when following up after, because I feel like all the resources are there, but you don't learn anything if it's just in your back pocket, right? If you don't ever quite get there, but if you go there and it's 3 hours long, and you're like, and then you never actually accomplish it. So,
and that speaks to, I think, the learning style of a lot of the younger generation coming up. They're used to watching things on their phone. They're used to this, these micro learning, and so I like Jennifer, I've been working on building, no more than 5-minute videos on a specific topic, and, finding software that really lets me do that. I'm using a program that, records my screen, but is also showing all the clicks and highlighting what I'm doing. So if you're doing a training on how do you do X in the software, when you click something, it highlights it. When you start typing something, it highlights it. So you see that as well. And that's something I've been working on, and it's actually tough when you start to think about how do you condense, a point about compensation, just one of the 3 rules we always talk about, down to less than 5 minutes with everything you want to say, but you have to get that essential point across.
Yeah, I think
and that's where it's learner-centered versus teacher-centered, right? Because I always love to talk, but then it turns out that nobody wants to listen to an hour of that, right? So anyway. Go ahead, Derek. Sorry, I didn't need to.
I was going to say, I think a couple of points that Tim made earlier. I mean, it's great that we have lots of different ways of delivering this teaching and training, and also the length of time. I mean, I don't suppose we can do it all in TikTok, but we have to have different ways of approaching that, because Jennifer, as you said, people want to do it, but things get in the way. So the short bite-sized things are good, and also there's, as we were saying earlier, there's a lot of stuff out there. So triage is important of the training materials we put out there. YouTube's got a lot to answer for, hasn't it? The fact that anybody can upload anything, and there's some great stuff there, but there's some not so great stuff there, and that's sort of our mission. And so another point that Tim made was that we all do things in a slightly different way. We all explain compensation or spillover in a slightly different way, and we've all got slides to do it. What I'm trying to do, certainly in the UK, is sort of curate some slides that people can use. So there maybe be half a dozen ways of explaining a particular point. You just choose the slide that you're most comfortable with. So we've got the choice as well as trainers to do that.
So that leads really
Yeah, and
sorry, into a topic that we wanted to jump on. And how do you properly vet information? Because like you said, Derek, there's so much out there. Everybody can potentially make a video or make a slide deck. And so how do you vet which is information you want to share with your users and information that you don't want to share? Because it seems overwhelmingly people are using these outside developed resources.
I think part of that is knowing who to trust, and that's, you know, within the flow cytometry community, you know, there's a group of us who have been training for many years and built a reputation on that. And then you go to YouTube and, you know, we'll have videos here, but then you'll see some video from some random person, generally full of mistakes about flow cytometry. And, you know, as Derek said, YouTube has a lot to answer for. I think for an average user, if they are getting into this and they go to their core facility and talk to the, you know, the core facility folks, they can point them and say, you know, videos from these people are things you should watch. And again, if they have the curated list, they do that. But at the end of the day, the only way you get to do that, you know, one is knowing who's doing it, but then you have to sit there and watch it. And I've watched a lot of those bad videos, and it's, you know, you want to, you know, you face palm and you want to just like make comments, and, you know, YouTube, you can put a thumb down and then make some comment, but that gets drowned out in the noise, I think.
And then you have to keep it up too. That's the other thing, is like often stuff goes out of date. And so what I used to reference, now I've looked over recently and thought, you know, this isn't quite, it doesn't match my learning objectives anymore. It hasn't been updated in 5-10 years. And some of the basics are absolutely correct still, but the nuance is not what I'm looking for.
I like how you meant the learning objectives, because the first criterion is you have to know what the learning outcomes are. What behavior do you want to be changed through that training program? And then the second thing is the continual refreshment, because you know, what worked 5 years ago might not be working today. So just expect that this is always a living set of documents and videos. The mix between text, video, how-tos, protocols, open source. Sometimes there are some interesting data sets that are in repositories, such as the Allen Institute. And third is, you know, just learning and trying to make it better. And a last criterion, which I didn't realize I was doing, but I wasn't paying attention to diversity and equity. So I was pulling my resources really from more narrow resources. So it's a bit harder to find people from all over the world, but that's something that we've, I don't want to say we failed at, but we were ignorant of and not really thinking about. So that's something that to try to bring different voices. I'm not only talking about men and women and cultures, but also age groups, right? Is it always the professor that's talking, or just sometimes, you know, a beginning graduate student has something to say that might be of value, but all of this takes time, right? We have to watch the videos, you have to read the resources. So in a way, it'd be great to collaborate with people on, I know the Global Bioimaging is doing this, so to work with other people saying, what are your favorite references? And then distilling those down. I could talk for hours, so I'll just be quiet now.
Yeah. In terms of pointing people to the right resources as well, this sort of group has a role, doesn't it? The local cytometry groups and the ISAC obviously is, in terms of flow cytometry, is quite important in terms of education. But you know, again, as Tim said, we know the right people to put people in touch with, so we should be putting our hands up saying, you know, if you want some education resources, come and speak to us. We might not be the ones to deliver what you want, but we can put you in touch with somebody who can.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point. And I think when talking about vetting resources as well, relying on the community, right, and the societies within the community to be able to support with that. So to change it up a little bit, you know, we've already touched on some, you know, resources that might be available and utilizing short videos and some pre-existing content. I'm curious to hear from the group how everyone approaches training. Do you look at it more of an individual one-on-one approach to be able to best train investigators, or is it better in group settings? And you know, that's a pretty loaded question, but I'm curious what everyone has to or thinks about that.
I
Well,
think,
for us, oh, go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say, I think we all want it to be one-on-one because that's the best mechanism. The practical approach is division. At Rochester, again, we do lectures. We have a general open lecture to highlight what flow cytometry is. And then we immediately get into one-on-one training on the instruments. We really focus, much like driver's education. We're going to teach you how to drive the instrument. And then we supplement that with small group lectures, one-on-one. Matt Cochran, my technical director, we have open office hours. So anyone can come into us at that time. They know we're going to be in our office and we will answer any question they bring to us. But there has to be an effort by the learner to come because, short of me banging down every door at the lab and going in, I can't do that. So you make yourself available for those one-on-one sessions while scheduling those kind of group sessions.
From my perspective, we don't have time to train each individual person. We're onboarding, 20 or 30 people at a time, often very young, very new in their career. And so I really view it as this amazing opportunity to give them a taste of flow, and hopefully they'll love it their whole career and remember these few rules. That's all I want, a few things, just how to do comp right or how to do one thing right. And hopefully they carry that through. And I even tell them that, I say, this is your job for the rest of your career. As a side job is going to be the flow person who does it right and teaches everyone in that next lab you go into and whatever, how to do it right. I try to inspire them to be that voice. But it has to be done in groups for us. How to do that actively and how to do it effectively, where they really do end up taking that information and doing better flow with it, which is our ultimate end objective. It is a challenge for sure. But it's got to be done in groups. Just simply we don't have the time to mentor each person individually, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. In reality, these things fall between theory and practice, don't they? I would agree with Tim that one-to-one is the way to go if you can do it. But sometimes you have to do it in smaller groups. Particularly at the moment, that's what we're seeing when there's a lot of people who suddenly want to be trained. Even we can't do it with one-to-one. But I always use the driving analogy as well. You don't want somebody in the back seat saying, no, do you do it this way and turn the wheel. I'd much rather be doing it one-to-one if I can.
I agree that one-to-one is ideal because you build that personal relationship. In a way, you're a coach or a driving instructor. The one thing I would say that's difficult is, Tim, you brought this up, the office hours, is that informal learning is just as important because you train somebody at a microscope. They know how to run a microscope, but that life cycle experiment includes data analysis, includes problems, and sometimes people give up. And we were noticing that we keep a track of how many people are booking and are they continue using microscopes. And if you have, I don't want to call the luxury, but if you have the luxury of time to do so, checking in with people, suggesting office hours, we do coffee hours. But Tim, I like your idea. It sounds like yours is regularly scheduled. Do you have one once per week? I think.
Yeah, Matt and I each have, once per week at different times so that we can, get people depending on their schedule.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Like, we had a monthly coffee hour for this, but I think doing something more regularly like that, if you can, is terrific because a lot of that learning doesn't necessarily happen in the course. It a little bit happens in the course, a little bit at the microscope, and it cycles. And the other thing too is the mindset. I think sometimes with driving, I use that analogy too, but sometimes with driving, you get better, but you don't get that much better. You do get that much better if you line up. Okay, I'm not going to follow that analogy. How's that? I'm just saying with microscopy, it's lifelong learning. I'm not, I try to learn my stuff deeply, but I'll never be an expert on all the technologies coming out. So having that mindset that you're always, like Jennifer, you mentioned this too, knowing one thing well teaches you how to have the mindset to approach that next thing. So you won't learn everything in our core, but you'll learn how to approach these problems and how to solve them. I think that's even more important than the actual content, is the fact that microscopy and flow cytometry, in a way, they're not considered disciplines, but in a way they are, right? So treat it like you do any other discipline. It's not something that you pick up in a week, it takes years. But it's a lot of wonderful fun along the way and discovery, hopefully.
Exactly. And most of our users who come to us have got a specific end in mind, haven't they? They want to get from A to B or A to Z. as quickly as possible. So we don't have to teach them the depth that they might eventually learn. We need to teach them enough so that they can take those first steps and actually get hooked on the whole technique so that they come back.
And
That's what we want,
along
repeat
those same
business.
lines, you led again directly into our next topic. So a lot of our users, as you said, they're raring to go. They want to get on the machine and get going as soon as possible. So how do all of you manage proficiency checks, like moving users through training to being self-sufficient on instruments? And what are the landmarks you use along the way?
We have something called we don't call it the driver's test, but it is a driver's test. So after their training sessions, we have a standard assessment. We ask people to perform certain functions with no guidance, and then they send the data to us, and it's an integrity check. This is something that is new to us. We've only implemented it since the pandemic started, but we find that the learning seems to be stickier this way, because they get that extra session where they get a test. And I think there's some literature out there in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning that seems to say that feeling like you're being tested consolidates your learning. So I can't say that we've run a study. We can't do that ethically. But it seems to be working, this test, to get people in that mindset. And yeah, that's what I would say that is new for us.
We do call it, well, informally we call it the driver's test. So there's 2 sessions on the instrument, and then people have access to start booking things on our machine. And we use a PPMS system. iLabs probably does this as well. That lets us know who's using the instruments and where their experience is. So we, most people, once they just get like 9 to 5 access. So when our staff is there, there's somebody there so they can check in on them. Once they've hit a certain number of hours on the instrument, they can then apply for another level of training so they can get, 24/7 access. And after, and there is another test where they have to learn how to troubleshoot simple problems that might come up, so that they're not calling us at 2 in.the morning saying, I broke the machine, can you help me fix it? Which has happened, by the way, which is why we've changed some of the things. But again, we focus on, a lot of the focus we have is making sure you don't break the machine, because we can't, and that's where the testing comes in. The specifics of your experiment, you're going to have to come to us to talk to, and that, if you want to, but a lot of that then is dependent upon the PI's mentality and the lab philosophy of how much they actually come to you versus go to the technician and the grad student in the lab who's done the experiment before.
Yeah, that's sort of, for us, we don't do any testing, although I'm interested, Pina, in what you're doing there. I think that and Tim, that sounds very interesting. But we rely a lot on their group, their team, to ensure that the training continues and that they are following best practices at StemCell, but we put the best practices in place. So we've been working hard to actually get data about washing, something as simple as washing, where people just didn't believe there was much difference between what I call half a wash, which is just top up and spin and go, versus like 2.5 washes in a plate or what have you. So we did all these tests, and when we got them the data, and we decided as a company how we wanted to go forward with something as simple as washing, obviously titration, all of these different pieces. So we standardize across, and we put those best practices in place so that the group can then support the learners to make sure that they're following those best practices, because there's a lot of folks, and it's hard for us to follow up so much on that. Does it work perfectly? No, but definitely looking at lots of other options as well. So I'm interested to hear. Thank you.
So we have something, I suppose, similar to Pina and Tim, in that we don't actually have an official test for people, but there is a sort of sign off after they've done their initial training, which is 2 to 3 sessions. And we use PPMS as well. So they'll only have novice status to book machines until we're confident that they can do this all by themselves. But there's another point here as well, in that we've got quite a big lab, and everybody in the lab can train people. So there's 10 people who can do the training. So what we decided we needed to do was have an SOP for the training, so that everybody was not given it in exactly the same way, because everybody has different anecdotes and different jokes that they like to put in there. But there was a list of points that have to be delivered in whichever way you want. And so at the end of that, we know
you
that we
say
delivered those
checklist?
points to all users. Yeah.
Checklist I have to say, I live by checklists. It might be my brain that unless I write it down, it's not real, but I agree that having that standardized workflow and having a checklist, if you do one thing, have a checklist and a core for almost any procedure. I agree. That is, it's really good you brought that up, Derek. One thing I just want to qualify what I said is that mindset about microscopy. I think Derek and Jennifer, sorry if I'm forgetting anybody's name here, is sometimes people want to get in and get out. You know, the PI has a grant due or something due, so everything is modulated, right? Like ideally, you'd want to do microscopy the rest of your life, but if you're a summer student, or if you're going off to med school or going off to industry, it's maybe not relevant. So I think it always comes back to the learner, the user, the researcher, and their background and their needs, right? So we're not going to support somebody the same way who's doing a PhD versus somebody who's here for 3 weeks to get a result, right? So there's a bit of a qualification. And I'm sorry if I went off agenda, so I'll.
No, Pina, that was great. That was great.
Yeah. Well, it's true because sorry, Kathy, carry on.
Oh, well, it's okay. I was actually curious. So, you know, you mentioned that you have 10 members in your lab that carry out the training. I'm personally in a one-person lab during the day now, and there might be shared interests across facilities. So we just launched a poll to ask all of our attendees if they collaborate with other SRLs for training, and curious to see if any of our panelists today, like if anyone does cross or work with other SRLs for training or other technology areas.
That's a good question, Kathy, and it sort of actually falls into the remit of what I'm doing, because I suppose it applies more to the staff of the facilities, because you know we don't do things in isolation anymore. Well, we never did, I suppose, but we certainly don't now. You know, our cells are going off to proteomics or genomics or metabolomics, histology, wherever else. And the more we understand about what the requirements are for those other techniques, the better we're going to be able to provide a service for our users. So, you know, we're only starting on the journey of this at the moment, but you know, I think it's not necessarily cross-training in all the equipment that people have, but at least having a basic understanding of the other techniques and what the pros and cons are and how they want us to provide cells to them will provide a better service ultimately.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, in my role as director of all the facilities, I have the ability to tell people to do things, which is nice. And we've done some cross training, but we found, you know, our staff is busy. It's hard to do that. So we organize meetings, for example, with genomics, because the single cell has become so popular. Flow and genomics meet every month to review all the data that they've done and continue to build, you know, collaborative best practices between that. We've done the same thing with proteomics, so that from, you know, one set going to the next, things are smooth and even. We actually talked about once setting up a whole experiment that would go through every one of the facilities and show the best practices and the results of that, but never got off the ground other than the planning stage because we couldn't agree on a couple of things.
That's cool, Tim. So you're going across SRLs of different techniques. The one we don't do that as much, although we definitely do with microscopy some. One thing I wanted to bring up is that in StemCell, there's a learning and development department. And so about training in general, not about the techniques at all, really, but about training in general, there's been a lot of education that we've all learned through being at StemCell, and much more about the science of education instead of the science, educating the science, right? So that's been very interesting for me to learn that as a overarching concepts.
I really like the idea of the technology platforms being seen as supporting these is different than supporting an individual lab. And the idea of learning and development of core staff or platform staff, if you unify their training in how to deliver education, I feel that things will fall out and they'll start collaborating more naturally. But I'm not sure. It's really difficult here for people to take the time and effort to learn how to teach. People on our team, you know, they've taken teaching courses, but again, why are you doing this? You know, rather than that's great, you should be doing this. So that philosophy and idea and approach to technology platforms is spotty. some institutions might say, absolutely, you need to do this, whereas some institutions might think, why in the world, what does that have to do with microscopy at all? So the idea of building that argument, it can't be done locally at one institution. It's really wonderful to have associations like this and hearing these different voices where, of course, you'd be doing this, Derek, at the Crick, but it might not be a course for some other institutes. And knowing that there are places like the Crick that we can point to, and Tim at Rochester too, that really helps, you know, and that StemCell has a learning and development department. Like, it, to me, it's something very natural, but it's still an argument. When I say locally, I sometimes have to make, you know, some people get it, but not everybody does, because it's not really science, is it? Education, how is it science? Well, it powers research, makes it more efficient, and it leads to new discovery when you have people that know what to do and how to apply the technology creatively. Yeah. But again, it's an argument that can be quite exhausting to make, and it's really wonderful to have groups of people like this and bringing people together to advocate for this.
I think it can take a time to get that across to people. You mentioned the word efficiency there, Pina, and that's great, because I think the more you educate people, the more efficient they are. And you know, we're all being funded to do this work, and the more efficiently we can do our experiments, the better that is for the funding bodies as well. We're going to get more out of it. Education underpins that.
I'm going to be
convince the PI
video and using your video clip.
You have to upfront load that though, right? So the financial return on investment for training is actually very hard to do those calculations. So you have to do your level 3 evaluation. Did somebody take the information and apply it and do a better job as a result of that? That's hard to test. And then it's really hard to know. I work in a company, what's the return on investment? And training is very expensive. We actually calculate how much we spend in people hours. And as part of, you know, our budgets, etc. And training is extremely expensive. It's very people intensive, and you end up with the ROI where you can't measurably attach it to an outcome, such as a product gets developed faster in our case, or a paper gets published faster, right? So that's quite difficult. I'd be very interested if anybody has any tips on how to get to that ROI, so that we can start improving it, right?
Yeah, I think we all would, Jennifer, because I think that's the hardest thing in terms of education, is to get that relevant metric at the end of it that shows that you have actually raised the bar and you have actually made things better for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I wanted to say is Eyebiology. I haven't watched it in a while, but Eyebiology has a scientific education series that is quite. I found it quite inspiring when I saw it. There was a lot about active education, and it was based on data. It was evidence. It was good.
Yeah, it did come up earlier in the chat, one of the microscopy comments, but they do have some decent flow cytometry stuff on there as well. It's a pretty comprehensive training platform to look at. So rolling into the next topic, all of our training programs have undergone huge shifts in the past year and a half with COVID. And now that we're slowly kind of creeping out, how do you envision your training program evolving from here? Are you going to be keeping some of the virtual platform topics you've created, or are you going to move fully back to in person?
We don't have a blended version to answer. We can't answer blended.
Anybody? No? See what the future holds when it comes, I guess.
I was really surprised by some of the things that Zoom allowed. I would thought that training people on an instrument via Zoom wouldn't work well. In some ways, it made you much more attentive as a trainer to paying every little attention to the sequence of logic and the button presses that you might make. So in a way, it slowed the training down. But so I think in the ideal world, we'd have a combination of both. You know, even if we're on site in another room, being out of that room means that person's in charge. They have to drive. They have you as the coach, but they're in charge, not you. And I think when you're in the room, you're in charge. So you want to really build that culture or that sense that they're the ones, oh boy, driving it, right?
Yeah, that learner-centered approach, right? It's surprising how some of these more remote things really helps with that. Take the trainer out of the picture a little bit, which is good in some ways. For us, we're definitely going blended. We had problems anyway before with scaling, so training more and more people. We need to go blended, and then just-in-time training was not happening, so people had to wait for the next set of sessions, and so we couldn't train them the next week, for instance, when they needed it. And so people were learning things not at the right time, and then they would forget, right? So it was not just in time, which is a really big principle that I would like to move more towards. So we're going blended for sure. How to do that effectively is something I'm really trying to learn now. It is not simple. And just barfing slides up on the internet, please don't do that. It's horrendous to watch. And even if you've voiced over and done a good job of the transitions and what have you, I personally find I don't learn much. I'm definitely sitting back. I'm usually doing 2 other things. In fact, there are studies showing that people are usually doing at least 2 other things when sitting back watching passively, online shopping and texting being the 2 top 2, I think. Actual studies. So how to do it effectively and have people leaning forward and really into it and learner-centered, like Pina said, is really tricky.
I think one of the things that we did, I commend Matt for doing this, is he made little videos on every step of the training process. So he took his SOP and broke it down and made these 5-minute videos, made them available on all of the instruments so people could watch them. We then started doing training. We fortunately had a room where we could have physical distance. And so Matt would be on Zoom at one end watching the computer and telling the person, okay, this is where you need to go, and there, so he could actively do that. But they still now have a new resource that you didn't have before. It was something we always talked about, but COVID gave us the opportunity to make them. So if somebody forgets something, we can say, oh, go check this video. It'll give you, in 3 minutes, you'll see exactly what you need to do. And he's done those for the troubleshooting videos and everything. So we actually created a whole new resource that we didn't have before because of COVID. But, we will continue this, we'll continue the in-person, but a lot of, taking advantage of Zoom, and even, for troubleshooting that, when people were on the instrument, we use Slack. They could tell us, oh, we have a problem. So then we could zoom in and help them, troubleshoot the problem. But they're the ones sitting in front of the machine. We're just kind of observing the data and saying, okay, did you try this? And, can help guide them through. So they're learning our thought processes on troubleshooting their experiment, but having to do the work rather than us coming in just, zing, 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 and you're done.
Yeah, I mean, this period has definitely been an opportunity for training, and something that as Tim said, we've all wanted to do it for a while, and it's accelerated that process. So we've gone down that route of having small 2 or 3 minute videos on all of the stages of the flow process. But certainly at our light microscopy facility have found that even though we're mainly back in person now, they're still doing a lot of training virtually. They're just in different rooms, but because it's easy enough to do it that way, people are taking the opportunity to do that.
I also like the way that a bit of, it sounds like having the videos online means that the person at the microscope or at the machine, right, has to solve the problem. And sometimes, that experiment, like, it depends. If it's a high, live cell experiment, we're going to go in quickly to try to help. But sometimes when it's fixed or something that's not as time sensitive, if they take that extra time to watch that video, Tim, like you said, it's a problem for them that they have to solve. If I go in and help, look at the light path, this is what you do, this is how you think. It's very different from saying, go look at this video and figure it out. It sort of runs against grain because you want to help. You feel like you're being a bit mean, but in the end, they'll always remember if they take that 5 to 10 minutes. So I think those videos we have a few of those as well, and they've been a great add. They're rough, but they're really useful, at least on our end, because we haven't the time to polish, but we just release them anyhow.
Yeah, and Pina, talking about time, right? There's such an investment of time by SRL members to educate investigators and researchers and really make sure that they have the proper training. So given that investment of time and all that goes into it from the SRL perspective, curious to hear everyone's approach on, do you charge for training? Is it free for education and training, or are there associated costs in your facilities? And what are your views on it?
I think Jennifer already said that they've calculated the cost of training. It's very high in people hours, very high in effort. I know some facilities charge for training, and I recognize that. At our institution, we have an institutional support for our core facilities. And so what we do is that money that the institution is paying, we justify that as that is the training fee. So we don't charge people for that. we started to charge in our microscopy facility for the time on the instrument, because it takes, you may have 4 or 5 hours on the machine that we can't be using that for other things. So we charge you for the instrument time, but not for the staff time to do the training.
We don't charge at StemCell because we don't do chargebacks company. It's a little bit different. But in my previous lives, I think you charge a small nominal fee. It depends if they're prisoners or not, right? If they have to go to the training and they don't want to, then I think charging a little bit gives it some value. Just like on the internet, you try to give something away for free on Free Cycle or whatever, like people don't show up, whatever, but you could charge $5 and then it suddenly becomes more valuable to them, right? So it's like this sort of psychological game you almost play there, but I don't have too many prisoners at StemCell, so we're lucky on that piece of it. But I do think sometimes a nominal fee, because it doesn't cover the trainer time in any way, I really don't think. But a nominal fee can give it value inherently, and people then show up and don't do the no-shows and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so internally, we have a mixed economy, actually. Flow, we've never charged people at all, not even for instrument time for the training, but some of the other cores do that. So light microscopy will charge for their training. And this is one of the things that, I'm trying to address at the moment, because it's different in different core facilities. We really should try and make that the same. But if I'm doing training for external people, there generally will be a cost for the reasons that Jennifer says there, that people need to see a value in it. And if you're giving it away, you don't get that often.
I should add, we actually, in Flow, we actually buried in the rates, the institutional rate that we charge investigators. So we do a full cost recovery, which takes into the time that it does the training, but then we do back that out with the subsidy. So we actually know the full cost. And if any external people come in, yeah, I'm going to charge them,
We do a blended approach as well. We've in the past, our training fee was really low, but now what we do is we bundle 10 hours of prepayment with a nominal fee, because we found people were using our training and then leaving after they paid their nominal $50 or $100. So now with the prepayment, at least it goes towards that the cost recovery, towards the time and effort that we invest in training. But every institution is different. It happens that our institution has a number of different imaging cores, so it's really important that we stay sustainable that way. Otherwise, I think, Tim, your model of charging per hour is something that is my preference, just a lot simpler, administrative wise as well.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. I think we've answered most of the questions that have come up in the chat. So if I've missed any that are buried in there, feel free to shout them out. Or if you have any other questions, we would love to answer them. We have about 5 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask our esteemed panel of education gurus, please.
There was, I haven't managed to follow all of the chat that's been going on. There was a question there, wasn't there, about training users for cell sorters?
There was, yes. Yeah, I did.
There's been quite a lot of discussion about, which I would say, yes, we do that. We will train people to use any cell sorter, because then it empowers them, doesn't it? They can do that whenever they like. But the training is more involved, obviously, than analytical flow cytometry.
Well, and that was one reason why we moved into it in our facility, was because people were getting clinical samples that were showing up at like 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night that they wanted to sort and process it that day. And my facility is not staffed at midnight to run a sort. So
do you guys require that the user has some familiarity with analyzers first, or do you dive head in with sorting? Because I have an interest, maybe it's not different, but a lot of the people that want to sort on their own tend to want to sort very simple samples. So they want to do that GFP, 1 cell per well, cell line, and that type of sorting. So do you then require for them to understand all the details of compensation if all they ever care about is a live dead stain and a GFP label?
There's a lot more triage of the people who are going to do that, because we have a Propel Avalon sorter, just simple 2 fluorescent protein. We don't need necessarily people to have a huge understanding of flow for that, but certainly we'll have people who are doing 10, 12, 15 colors on an analyzer who want to move that to a sorter. So, one, they've got to have the understanding of the software, because normally we're training them on the ARIA machines. They've got to have the need to do it, and they've got to use it regularly. Otherwise, they're not going to get trained to do it. They'll get charged more for an assisted service.
That's the same way I approach it too. If I have a user coming in with a simple sort, I put them on the more user-friendly sorter. If it's more complicated or they require the ARIA, then they have to have some experience on the analyzers, and we take it from there. And same thing, it has to be used regularly, because I've trained a number of people who then discover it's really complicated and never come back after going through like 10 training sessions on the sorter, and it's a huge expenditure of time then.
We brought in a Biorad S3E with the idea of that being a walk-up investigator-driven system, again, for the GFP-only sorts and some very simple sorts. And what we found is that no one wanted to learn how to use it themselves. They would prefer our staff to use it, to do that. They're willing to pay the extra money for our staff to run the instrument for them. So we've never had anyone actually move to the next level of even wanting to run an ARIA.
That's also what I'm discovering with the SH800. Everybody's complaining about how long it takes to set it up. And I'm like, dude, don't you realize that I do all of this on the MoFlow before you usually get to see it? It's not magic. It doesn't magically set itself up. And the SH is much easier. So I echo what you're saying, is that I'm kind of concerned that people are now just going to go back to just showing up and not having to worry about anything.
I think that's pretty common, at least in my experience. I would say the majority of people I've trained to sort, unless they have an absolute need that they have to sort after hours, most of them revert back to the core doing the sorts anyways.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting too, because I think there's a lot of people that would really like it to do after hours or weekends, especially now with like very large CRISPR screens, right? But maybe they only have 1 or 2 experiments that that's necessary for, and that's it. So they don't meet the threshold of being able to sort enough. If that's not there, it just might not be worth that investment of time.
Yeah, because it is a big investment of time to get somebody trained on a sorter. Even one of the easy user operated sorters, it's much more in depth than getting up and started on an analyzer.
Yeah.
One thing you can do to extend your hours though is to, and it doesn't work perfectly, but is to set up the sorter for them. And then get them to just run it. And if, with the full understanding, if it totally has a meltdown, then that experiment's gone. You're not coming back, but oftentimes that can go for many hours without issues. And that can save everybody, kind of give it a compromise, right? They don't have to do a massive amount of training, but they have to understand the experiment may die, right? It may not be successful.
And that's something we do in our facility. We have a separate fee for cell sorter startup, where we'll go in and get everything set up and ready for them, and they can just walk on and sort. So that is a nice sort of hybrid between the two.
Want to make sure that they have good samples.
Yes, that too. I usually stay for the first few minutes to make sure it isn't going to be super cloggy.
Even for microscopy, that's what we say. It's all in the sample. The photons don't lie.
Perfect. Well, I think that is a great lesson to learn on, because it spans all the technologies. It all comes down to the sample. So thank you to our excellent panel for joining us today, to our sponsors, BD. And in case you missed part of this, or you want to come back and watch it again, it will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel later today. We're taking a brief hiatus in the series for the summer, so we will be back in the fall talking about instrument funding and sustainability. So thank you everybody for coming. Have a wonderful summer, and we'll see you in September.
So,
ciao.
Thanks, everyone.
bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.